Welcome to the fourth episode of Migrate AWS Lambda to Azure Functions. In this episode, we're going to review Azure and look at some of the functionality and how it compares to AWS Lambda. This is our AWS Lambda function. Notice that there's an API gateway, there's the function or Lambda itself, along with logs and DynamoDB. And here we can see some code for the Lambda function. In Azure, we group related assets in a container that's called a resource group. Here I'm looking at the resource group called AWS Migration. The resource group has 4 resources within it. Those resources include the plan. Think of this as a server farm. It defines the compute resources needed for the application. We have a storage account. This is where things like settings and logs are stored, but it also provides services like table storage that we use for our cache. We have the function itself that we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, and we have what's called application insights, which is the telemetry and metrics that we're tracking for our application. What's important to note about a resource group is it's a unit that can be deployed as well as deleted as one group. Notice that I have this delete resource group available, and I can type the resource group and all of its components will be deleted as part of this one operation. The other important thing to note is I have this export template option. With the template, it creates what's called an Azure Resource Management template. It's basically JSON that describes the infrastructure that's inside of a resource group. With this template, I can then create a resource that allows me to deploy from GitHub. This is the template on GitHub under the AWS Migration project. If you go to the main project on GitHub, you'll see that there's a button, Deploy to Azure. Using that template, this Deploy to Azure button has everything it needs to provision all of the assets required to run the examples in this series. This is the Azure Dashboard. You can have multiple dashboards, and it's a way that you can customize what resources you wish to look at. You do not have to put resources from the same resource group on the dashboard. To add an item to the dashboard is as simple as navigating to the item. In this case, I'm going to drill into storage and click the little push pin in the upper right. So when I click that, I refresh my dashboard, and you can see the storage item's been added. With the dashboard configured, accessing a resource is as simple as clicking on the tile for that resource. Here you can see we've gone into storage and we see an overview of metrics related to storage. We can drill into those. We can also use the Storage Explorer, which allows us to navigate to our table that we're using for caching. This is the primes table, and I can even see the data that's contained within that table. From the same dashboard, we can jump into our Functions app and see the details for that application. Remember, a function app is a unit of deployment and scale. Although we can have multiple functions, here you can see there's this HTTP trigger function as well as the isItAPrime function. The settings are going to be global across those. So any SSL, authentication, authorization, identity, cores, etc. is all going to apply to all the functions within this function app. If we need to have different settings at this level, that's no problem. We just create a separate functions app that has its own settings. One nice thing about function apps is they can share the same storage and they can also share the same plan. So you don't have to create a separate storage account or service plan for every function app. We will look at some of these more advanced features such as security in a later episode. And that concludes another episode of Migrating Lambda to Azure Functions. I strongly encourage you to take a look at the link aka.ms/funazure for a completely free fundamentals course that covers Azure fundamentals.